It started in June of 2002 when my girlfriend and I were using moderate amounts of cocaine, and one day my dealer was out of dope. I ran into an old buddy who said he could get some heroin, so I agreed. I went home and chopped up 2 small lines of white powder for both me and my girlfriend. The buzz was great, even though it made us puke our guts out. As a couple of weeks go by of snorting dope every day, it was getting expensive because every time my girlfriend would snort a line and then she would puke it up and lose her buzz, and of course, she would want another one. That's when that same old buddy told me that by using a needle, you get a way better high and you don't waste any. I tried it once and I was hooked. My girlfriend refused to inject any dope, so I told her that I wouldn't give her any more because she was wasting it by throwing it up every time. So she finally agreed, but I had to shoot it in her arm for her because she was too scared to do it herself. After a couple months of shooting heroin, I realized that I couldn't stop without getting deathly sick. I finally lost my job, and she wasn't working either, so that meant that no money was coming in with a very expensive habit to support. I pawned everything I owned. Then I started pawning my mom's belongings, my girlfriend's parents' belongings, stealing checks from my grandmother, stole money from my girlfriend's parents' cash card, and resources for money were running out. I didn't know what I was going to do if I didn't get some money for the next day. So on New Year's Eve of 2002, I was desperate because I knew that I had no way of getting any money the next day, and I would be sick as hell. My girlfriend's family was gone for the night, so I went into their house and took her dad's .22 caliber pistol that he had hidden in their basement. So with the pistol in my jacket pocket, I drove up to the local gas station and robbed the place at gunpoint. I came home with almost $400, so I was relieved knowing that I had some cash to buy some heroin the next day. My girlfriend was flipping out, but we were good and high for 2 days until we ran out of money and dope again. So, thinking of how easy that was, I went and robbed that same store 2 nights later. This time though, I only came out with less than $100, enough to last only through the night and into the morning. So the next afternoon, I went and robbed a different gas station, coming out with over $600. I went straight to my dealer and bought $500 worth of dope, 13 or 14 bags. That night, I saw myself on the news for these robberies. I was flipping out. I didn't know what to do. 4 o'clock in the morning, the police raided my girlfriend's parents' house where I was staying and took me into custody. I knew I was going to be sick as hell in jail. There was nothing I could do but sit and be sick. My bail was $100,000, and I had no way to come up with that kind of money. In May of 2003, I was sentenced to 48 months in prison. With behaving properly, I only had to do 32 months. I was finally released in September of 2005. My girlfriend hooked up with someone else and had a kid, so I went back to my family who had forgave me for everything I did in the past. About a month after I was out, I tried heroin again. I was hooked again instantly. A few months into that, I tried kicking by myself and I couldn't do it, so I went and got onto the methadone program. Now to this day, I drink my 110 milligrams every day to stay well. I tried using again, but it doesn't do anything but buzz me for about 2 minutes and then it's gone, so I figured that it isn't even worth it. So now I'm working again full time and trying to get my shit straight again. I was turned onto a crack habit by that same old buddy, so now I'm trying to control that. I asked myself, why didn't I learn my lesson? Wasn't prison enough? My memories of this event are patchy at best, but through talking to the people involved, I put them together in a logical order. I came very close to death, and I do not recommend Datura as a recreational drug. Even though I have survived this experience, it was terrifying, but it was incredible and life-changing. I still have trouble dealing with the emotions I experience when I look back on it. This document is perhaps a therapeutic tool I am using to deal with it once and for all. Philadelphia, Thanksgiving break, junior year of high school. My best friend, and as of 2008, my wife, Amanda, slept over my house. We were big potheads at the time, but I've never experimented with anything else. We woke up early to go to our friend Jeremiah's house because he grew weed and we wanted to celebrate the break by smoking all day. I drank a beer I stole from my dad on the way there. When we got there, a strange smell filled the house. His parents were away, and he had a pot of a strange amber liquid on the stove. Jeremiah was an interesting kid. He appeared to be a run-of-the-mill street thug, but he was very interested in botany. He would see plants in people's yards and he would know their Latin name and all these facts about them. When we got there, we asked him what the stuff was. He called it Datura Loco. I had never heard of it. He said he got the seeds on the internet and planted it and made a tea from it. He told me it had similar effects to weed, which was quite false. We smoked a blunt, but I was still intrigued. We hung out for a while and decided to go to Amanda's house and watch a movie. Before we left, I asked Jeremiah for some of the Datura tea. He put about 4 shot glasses worth in an empty bottle and we left. On the way to Amanda's house, I drank it all. The dose was for both of us, but Amanda didn't want any, so I drank it all. It was the worst tasting thing ever, but I forced myself to drink it. We arrived at her house and sat down to watch a movie. She put on Herbie Fully Loaded. Luckily, I don't remember any of it. Sometime throughout the movie, I felt extremely thirsty. Since it was autumn, I poured myself a glass of apple cider. It was difficult to drink. Every time I took a sip, I felt like my throat was closing up. I tried to drink it, but my thirst would not be quenched. We sat a little longer, then I began feeling very uncomfortable. I had to pee, so I got up and went to the bathroom, and nothing would come out. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, but could not pee. I decided to ignore it, and I went back to the couch. After the movie, our friend Samantha came to take us to our friend Rob's house to smoke more. By the time she arrived, I was speaking mostly nonsense. I felt like I was talking normally, but neither of them could understand, so it was kind of frustrating. We got into Sam's car. On the ride, I thought I was smoking a cigarette, but I kept dropping it, and then I wouldn't be able to find it. This would continue for the next 3 days. We got to Rob's house, and they all smoked another blunt. They didn't give me any, but I didn't notice. I was still smoking my imaginary cigarettes and speaking gibberish. I went into Rob's bathroom and tried to pee again. In my mind, I still couldn't pee, but from what I found out later, I actually peed all over the floor and the walls. I also took all of his family toothbrushes and put them in my pocket. I do not know why. They all went outside to smoke another blunt, and I did too. As they were smoking, I wandered away, and they found me about an hour later in a neighbor's yard talking to a pine tree. Again, I do not remember why. This is where my memory gets better. We left Rob's house and went to a party at my friend John's house. Again, I smoked imaginary cigarettes the whole way there. I had no idea who I was, where I was, or who I was with, and I had given up communicating because no one could understand me. When we got there, a lot of my friends were there, and John's mom, who I had known since kindergarten. It was his birthday, and there were balloons. The balloons moved around and seemed to follow me. Their shape shifted between squares, circles, and triangles. I continued to smoke imaginary cigarettes. At first, no one noticed my state because I was keeping quiet. I was standing in the corner because I was afraid of the balloons. John's mom saw me and came over to talk. She asked me about college, and I replied. I gave her a logical answer, but to her, I was still speaking gibberish. She knew I was on something and took me to my parents, who in turn took me to the hospital. This is where it gets messy. On the walk back to my parents' house, each piece of sidewalk I stepped on seemed to shatter away. I was terrified because I didn't want to fall through, but jolts of electricity ran through me when I tried to run. My parents were panicked and rushed me to the hospital because they didn't even know I smoked weed at the time. When I got to the hospital, they took me in right away. To me, the doctors and nurses looked like monsters, and I kept trying to get out of my chair and run. They had to physically restrain me. When they got a bed for me, they held me down and took my clothes off. I fought them as best as I could, but any fast movement would send a shock of electricity through my body. I punched and kicked the nurses a few times, but was unsuccessful in my attempt to escape. Eventually, they calmed me down. One of the doctors told me he was a wizard and had a magic potion to cure me. He handed me a cup of black liquid and told me to drink it. It was charcoal to pump my stomach, which was futile because it had been hours since I took it. I gulped the drink down and vomited everywhere. Fast forward a little, and still no memory. Apparently at this point, my kidneys were shutting down, so they had to put a tube in my penis so that I could pee. That was not fun at all. I remember screaming a lot and trying to fight, but I was tied down. Fast forward a little more. I was now in a different room. Chewbacca was next to my bed. I was tied to the bed still, and all sorts of IVs were in me. I kept trying to rip them out, so they had to put a lot of tape on them. Again, the imaginary cigarettes came back. I smoked it for a while, then dropped it in my sheets. I tried to look for it, but instead, I found the stick shift from my car. I looked up, and I was driving down the street all of a sudden. I drove for a while, and then went to hit the brakes, but they were gone. I kicked my feet, but the sheets were covering them. I then returned to the hospital room. I looked at the small fan in the room, and a strange miniature girl was crouched behind it, staring at me. I was scared of her and told Chewbacca to take them out, and he did. I found out later that Chewbacca was my dad. Next thing I knew, I was in Amanda's dorm room, smoking a bowl like I had been a few weeks ago. All of the same people were there, and that day replayed itself almost entirely. Then, I was back in the hospital bed. This vision of the dorm room and the vision of driving my car kept happening over and over, interspersed with being in the hospital bed next to Chewbacca. The whole time I kept dropping the imaginary cigarette I was smoking. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital bed feeling like I was hit by a train. I still had the pee tube inside me and was hooked up to IVs. I had only a few memories of the past 4 days, but they made no sense to me. As I write this, I realize again how patchy the memory is. My parents were there and explained to me what happened. They called Amanda to find out what I took. They told me my kidneys stopped working for almost 2 days and just now were working again, and my heart rate jumped from dangerously low to dangerously high over and over. The doctors gave me a 50% chance of survival. I spent the next day in ICU before they released me. I was extremely weak for the next 5 or 6 days, and they made me go to a drug counselor. Over the next 3 years, I did many drugs heavily and developed some serious problems. Anytime I did acid or shrooms, I would see that small girl behind the fan, and it creeped the hell out of me. 8 months ago, I went to jail and then to rehab, and I have not used drugs since then. Datura was the first step in a long road of drug abuse, and looking back, I wish it scared me straight. I still wish I remember more of what happened, but maybe it's best that I don't. In 2006, I got a very high-paying and high-stress job at a small ad agency in New York. I was so excited. More money. I was a producer in New York. I was the boss. Well, it wasn't long until the actual stress of the job set in. I would have to deal with multiple clients a day, all wanting something more ridiculous than the next, a lazy editorial staff, and a boss that smoked weed secretly in his office. After about 2 months, I started to lose sleep. I was slowly losing my mind. I needed something to put me to sleep. I would ask friends for a Xanax here and there, which helped tremendously, but I always felt like shit the next day. I went to the doctor and got a prescription for Ambien extended release. It was fantastic. The first layer would dissolve in my stomach, instantly knocking me out, while the second layer would dissolve throughout the night, keeping me asleep. I would go to work well rested and able to deal with the stress. I always knew that I had my little blue pill that would guarantee me sleep no matter how much stress I endured at work. After about a month of taking my little blue pill, the problem started. I would come home buzzed or drunk sometimes after work and take my Ambien and then do things I wouldn't remember. I woke up one morning and all of the artwork in my apartment was moved to one wall. One time I woke up on the floor of my living room. My boyfriend had locked me out of the bedroom and had taken all the knives in with him. Evidently, I was acting so insane and hallucinating that he thought I was going to kill him. One time, I showed up at the local bar at like 1 in the morning. I literally sleptwalked into the bar and ordered a drink and had full-on conversations with people. None of this I remember. This didn't happen like 1 or 2 times, but more like 20. A couple of times I remember waking up and talking to people that weren't there. If I didn't get to bed within 20 to 30 minutes after taking the drug, I would hallucinate. I would think friends were there with me in the apartment. Then after a couple of months, those friends became objects I would see out of the corner of my eye. I was losing my mind to Zolpidem. I became increasingly more and more paranoid in my conscious life. I was convinced I had AIDS. I started seeing symptoms that weren't there. I would walk around like a ball of anxiety all day long. All I could think about was that when I got home, I would take my Ambien with a beer and everything would be fine. I would plan my evening around when and how I took my blue pill. It became an obsession for me. I would wait until 10 p.m. or so, and after a couple of drinks, I would take the pill. Then I would eat dinner. I was so scared it wouldn't work on a full stomach. One day I really just flipped out at work. My heart was racing and I almost fainted. I went to the doctor and told them what was going on. They cut off the Ambien and gave me lorazepam and a couple of other antidepressants for anxiety. It worked. The first night I took my lorazepam, that anxiety and obsession I had about my blue pill was gone. My friends later told me some of the stories, the things I would do on Ambien. I would call them up and ask them to meet me for a drink. I would sit in the bar, 1 minute, seemingly lucid and interacting, then the next, zoned out in another world. One night, I thought I was a bull and I started to ram my head against my friend's arm. Then the next second, I was normal. I have absolutely no memory of any event while under the influence of Ambien. I feel Ambien is a great medication for occasional use. Mixing it with alcohol and using it over the long term is dangerous. Before I begin, I want to say that I notice many people are aware of the negative side effects of amphetamines from reading other experience reports. Although I will focus on that, this is not like the other reports. None of the other reports mention taking a drug that forces you to do things when you're locked inside a place where there's nothing to do. Yeah, I'm talking about jail. About 2 weeks before I was incarcerated, I was prescribed Adderall extended release from the same doctor who prescribed it to me 3 years earlier. I had not touched it in those years. I started at about 10 or 15 milligrams a day, and he worked me up to 60 milligrams a day over time. I hardly remember if it worked on me or not. I was in a horrible crisis at that time in my life. But that's beside the point. I wanted to get an edge on college because I just started 2 weeks prior to my doctor's visit, and I also remember the decreased appetite effect it has on me. I wanted to lose some weight from a very long summer of drinking and partying. He prescribed me 60 milligrams a day starting the following day. the same dosage I worked myself up to over those several months. I thought about it, but I wasn't concerned. The next day, I was eager to do it. I like speedy drugs, and everyone here calls Adderall poor man's coke or poor man's yayo. I popped the 2 orange capsules and then laid down to be lazy like usual. My girlfriend got up and started to get dressed and ready. I went for a short drive to a liquor store for something to drink and slightly started to feel the effects after about an hour. It's hard to notice unless I'm really paying attention, but it gradually came to full effect and I started to feel the typical symptoms, which were awesome to me. I felt good, confident, but not the take over the world feeling. Motivated, not hungry, energetic, and productive. I went back and reported my condition to my girlfriend adequately. "I'm so fucked up," I told her. I had told her what it would do, so she analyzed me for a while and voiced any change in me she had noticed. She said I couldn't sit there and do nothing. I was always cleaning, rearranging something, talking to someone, writing or asking questions. I felt as if all this time I've not been on Adderall. I've been so lazy, and now I had to accomplish all the things I should have or never did. I called my dad and corrected all the problems I was having with him at the time. I wrote a letter to my probation officer telling him I want to turn over a new leaf and not fuck up anymore. I cleaned, I shopped, I organized, and I talked. I was finally a productive citizen. 5 days after this day, I was arrested at the local courthouse for a probation violation that occurred before my Adderall prescription. I would be in jail for the next 18 days. I thought to myself, at least I have my Adderall here. But I didn't make the connection that this drug makes me want to do things, and I'm in a place where I literally can do nothing. I was in a small 6-man cell for all these days. It was about 15 by 20 feet. I shared it with 5 other fellow criminals. I was completely unaware of the side effects Adderall can cause, but these side effects are extremely amplified when I'm forced to be separated from the world. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. My parents were in Mexico for several months on vacation and could not visit me, call me, or send me money. My brother came to visit me to tell me I'd lost my car, job, all my money, and all my belongings from my dorm room. Also, my bank account got closed, my parents wanted to disown me, and when I am released at 4 a.m. into the cold snowy night on my release date, I will be homeless and only have a t-shirt. This is true, all those things were happening on the outside. But Adderall can cause anxiety and paranoia, sometimes terrifying a person of social interaction or cause them to dread things they normally would not obsess over. Well, what happens when you're already anxious, paranoid, depressed, and terrified of the what if? Disaster. When I was told all this, I started to shake, harder and harder as I stood in the visiting booth. My mouth went dry, completely devoid of all moisture. I felt as if my stomach was tied into knots and that all hope was lost. I had a yearning to start putting everything back together, but I was trapped in jail. Back in my cell, I obsessed over that day's visit. With so much spare time and nothing to do besides write, draw, or watch city TV, I had plenty of time to overanalyze the situation. Is my girlfriend gone? She must be cheating on me. Everything is gone. I'll starve to death with no money or home. My parents never loved me. Everyone forgot about me. I'll never be able to go to college again. I even had a day where I was terrified the computers at the jail would be wrong and showed that I had to serve a year instead of 18 days. It was insane. One night, I was dizzy and felt very strange, especially when I stood up. I was resting, yet noticed my heart was unbelievably fast. I ended up blacking out and collapsing. My cellmates pushed the panic button, and I was taken to see a corrections officer as there was no nurse on duty. My blood pressure was completely fucked, and my heart rate was 180 beats per minute. The corrections officer freaks out, but is unable to send me to the hospital unless I am in the act of dying, or so they say. I was then placed in medical watch for several hours. Following that day, I saw a doctor and they told me I was in trouble. I had lost 20 pounds in 12 days. I weighed 178.5 pounds before incarceration. I was then at 158.5 exactly. After some tests, I was lacking nutrients, vitamins, and other healthy protein levels. I was malnourished. My skin was red, dry, and scaly. I already have a skin condition, but it made it worse. It spread all over my body, and jail doesn't help that either. My heart rate was still too high, but not bad. She said I could have gone into cardiac arrest or had a stroke. From that day until my release, things got really bad, but sometimes they were okay. A letter from my girlfriend, who had not left me, my brother assumed she did, helped to ease the anxiety attacks and depression. I was released and it took 2 days of my girlfriend nursing me back to normal for me to see reality. When she picked me up from jail, I was shaking and my heart raced when I spoke to her. I felt nervous around her, as if she was judging me or looking at me funny, and I still believed my world was crashing down around me. It has been 17 days since I've been released from jail. I have fixed my problems, but I still notice things are different since I've taken the drug. There are times when I feel slight social anxiety, and since I've been on the drug, I've had more problems with my girlfriend than usual. But that may or may not be from using Adderall. Three days ago, I had the most horrifying experience in my entire life. Me and my friend hadn't smoked marijuana in months, marijuana being the only thing I had ever done, and we decided to buy some magic brownies from a friend. The girl who sold them told us the only thing in the brownies was marijuana. We didn't really think they were going to give us any more than a buzz, so we ate them about an hour before my mom was supposed to pick me up. Bad fucking idea. I'm not really sure about the time, but I think about 15 minutes after taking them and realizing they did nothing for us, we decided to go home. I walked up to the street my mom was supposed to pick me up at and started reading my book. I don't know how much time had passed, but suddenly I began to feel intensely high. The cars would pass, and the whoosh sound they made would be delayed. I was like, shit, just what I needed. My mom is gonna be here any minute. I got up and started walking down the street in the direction of my house in hopes I would wear it off. It just got worse. I started feeling like if I just pulled the upper half of my body a little higher, I could have had an out-of-body experience. I kept trying to snap back to reality so I could fake it in front of my mom. My mom drives up minutes later, and I've never felt so high in my life. Everything looks so different. I get in the car and complain about feeling sick, and she just starts talking and driving. Suddenly, I feel like she is going down the same street she just went down, and I get this horrifying sense of deja vu. Like sometime in the past she went down the same street twice to check if I was high and see if I noticed what she was doing. To my knowledge, this has never actually happened. I asked her, "Hey, why are you going down the same street twice?" And she looked at me funny and she's like, "I didn't go down the same street twice." At this point, I feel so weird. She's like, "Are you alright? What's the matter?" We arrive at the house, and I go into the backyard, and oh my god, it totally hits me. I'm sitting on this swing thing we have, and my mom comes out to look at me. I have absolutely no distance perception whatsoever, so she looks like this little person coming towards me, slowly getting larger and larger. The backyard is ridiculous looking. Everything is wrongly proportioned. I try to explain what the backyard looks like, but I can't seem to find words. The backyard starts splitting, like instead of being a full picture in front of me, there are two halves and they branch out towards me when I turn my head from side to side. In my mind, I'm screaming, "What the fuck is this?" My mom asked me what the hell is the matter, and I feel like I have no choice, so I'm like, I took a marijuana brownie. And she's like, this is not marijuana. And suddenly it hit me that my brownie must have had something else in it, and I got so scared. My mom and sister take me inside to my sister's room, and our house looks like it's in a circle. Everything is curved out. Before I know it, I'm being driven to the hospital. My mom asked me to take my gum out, and I do. And then I start moving my tongue around the inside of my mouth. And when I do this, the entire scene in front of me gets this blurry line in the middle of it, and I can hear myself licking that line, defining it, creating it. I cannot explain how weird this was. But the worst part is coming. I came into the hospital and they admitted me. For a while, they were trying to get me to talk, but for some reason, I couldn't do that. And then, like magic, it all became fucking hell. Everything I saw was something I had seen in my memories years ago, or in different lifetimes. The walls, the curtains, the sounds of the hospital, everything. The nurse took me in to take a pee test, and that's when it really hit me. All that I was experiencing was a hell that had been created for me. All of it had happened before, and I knew that now I was going to be here for eternity. I started to cry, but she told me no crying, but it was so real. The things she was saying, the way the bathroom looked, the way she looked. I felt as though that all of this happened to me before. I knew it was real because the deja vu was so incredibly strong. I remember looking up at my sister's face and seeing her saying, "Astrid, talk to me." And deep within myself, I knew that she was only a simulation for the hell that had been created. I was meant to live in this endless cycle of horrifying deja vu for the rest of eternity. This is going to sound really self-centered, but I believe that every soul that had ever existed has lived the life of Astrid, experiencing the same things as me, and made the choice whether or not to take the brownie, which would determine their destiny forever. It's so ridiculous, but at the time, I believed it so much. I realized that all the people that had talked to me about drugs in the past were mere simulations to test my weakness and temptation. I mean, I'm not even really religious at all. The scariest part was that everything felt as though it had sickeningly occurred before, and that its purpose was to occur again and again and again in this never-ending cycle of torture. I try to explain this to some people after, and it's really obvious that you have to experience it yourself to understand the horror. So I'm guessing what I took was LSD. I was still feeling weird the next day, not like hallucinating or anything, but I just felt really weird. I don't think I'll ever know what it was for sure. The ER people got a blood test, but they said it's difficult to detect other drugs besides marijuana in the system. All I know is that I've done marijuana quite a few times in the past, and this was not marijuana. I just wonder if the circumstances were different. Maybe it wouldn't have been a bad trip. Anything to do with doctors scares me now. I went to the doctors for a checkup the next day because my mom was being a paranoid freak, and I saw the white walls of the doctor's office with cheesy little kid wallpaper on it. And I got this wave of terror, but it passed in like a second. I'm scared to even do marijuana after this. I just can't ever know exactly what I'm getting with drugs. My advice to everyone: expect the unexpected when dealing with this crap. I've always wanted to try LSD, but I never thought it would be this way. I had been planning to go to my friend's house on the weekend for a little get-together with some friends from school. All week I was trying to get my hands on some ecstasy because I had done that many times before and I loved it. Instead, I ended up getting some AMT from a somewhat reliable source because there was no ecstasy in the area. I got 4 pills, which had a very little amount of white powder in them, 40 to 60 milligrams, for $15 each. I was told, whatever you do, don't take 2 or you'll go crazy, and don't snort them. So I made my trip to my friend's house on Friday and had planned to wait for my other friend, we'll call him E, to get there so we could trip at the same time, since we both had never tried AMT before. I was planning on selling the other 2 pills to friends of a friend, but I'd clumsily dropped them in a puddle, which pissed me off to begin with. So when E arrived at about 12:30 a.m., we were kind of in a hurry to eat them because we knew they took a while to kick in and it was already late. So after we ate them, we were just chilling in the basement with 3 other friends who were not tripping but just smoking pot. I felt a little hazy shortly after taking them, but nothing too unusual. Then, about 15 minutes later, I felt sick to my stomach, so I asked E if he felt sick at all. And as soon as I asked him, he ran to the bathroom and puked his guts out. I sat down for another half hour feeling like shit, then got up and puked my guts out. Not too much later, I was feeling physically exhausted and clenching my teeth like crazy. I felt like I was rolling, but not as happy. The only visuals so far were tracers and exaggerated lighting. It was not until around 2 a.m. or so until the visuals got amazing and my senses seemed to be all heightened. The touch of anything to my body felt great, and little figurines came to life. I got confused a lot whether I was supposed to sit down and watch TV or just explore. I stood up every so often to examine the floor as it danced and swirled. I felt like I was seeing the earth move under the carpet. This drug was strong enough to make me not even want to smoke pot. I felt no need to, even though I was physically capable of it. It was not until about 6 a.m. when E and I finally decided to take some bong rips. We sat down and started watching cartoons, but I was analyzing them like I've never done before. This is when everything turned bad. I started relating every message of the cartoon to my life. I would think a thought, and if something good would happen on the show, I would think, yeah, I'm supposed to be thinking that. Or when something would happen on the cartoon, I would think it would be directed towards me, and only me. Which reminds me of the time I tripped on mescaline and I got the same effects, only the environment was different so it fueled more positive thoughts. I felt like everyone else in the world were just actors, and they were only here to convince me that it was real. So I said to E, I'm starting to get some pretty weird thoughts, but I couldn't explain them. I didn't know if I had just discovered the key to death and I had obtained a message somehow that I was on my way to the afterlife, or if I was just going crazy. I was so confused at this point, and I wanted out of the situation. I went upstairs and tried to leave through the side door, but when I tried to open it, the alarm went off and his dad came out. I apologized and went back downstairs. At this point, I told E what happened, and I felt like I really needed to leave. So I went back upstairs and went out the door this time, only to see his dad outside with the dog. I said, I gotta go, and he said, have a good rest of the summer. I must have looked like a basket case. But anyways, I got in my car and I was trying to find my way out of the neighborhood, which was unfamiliar to me. At this point, I was still hallucinating, but not nearly as much as 3 hours before. I drove around in circles for about 10 minutes, and then finally, I found my way out to the highway. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time, but I know I wanted to die. Or rather, I thought I was supposed to die. Like it was planned out that I was supposed to wreck my mom's 97 Honda Civic into a middle highway barrier across 2 lanes of traffic. So that's exactly what I did. But as soon as I saw the smoke, I yelled in anger because I was still alive. Or rather, because I now knew I was alive. Or maybe because I did not have an easy death. I don't know. But I got out of the car and walked across the highway only to see a man stopped along the road who happened to be an off-duty police officer. I talked to him as he was on the passenger side of his car and got in the open door of his driver's side. I was having a heated discussion with him and tried to start the car to drive off, but there were no keys in the ignition. So I got out and ran down the road trying to hitchhike my way home before the cops got there and miserably failed. It was not too long before I was tackled, cuffed, and thrown into the back of a cop car, but the stupid cops left the door open while they were talking to me. I remember yelling at them and them saying to me, "How would you like to get your ass beat by 2 of the smallest cops in town?" The drug was fueling my anger completely. This pissed me off so much that I got out of the car and ran down the street against oncoming traffic, yelling, "Go ahead and kill me, motherfuckers!" all while being chased by these two cops. Then, once they caught me, they tackled me again and threw me in the back of another cop car, but this time, they shut the door. Then, while they were talking to me through the window, trying to see if I should go to the hospital or jail, I started realizing what was happening, and I thought I was in hell. I thought I had died and I was in hell, or almost there. They put me on a stretcher and were tying me down and putting something on my face, oxygen maybe. I thought they were wrapping me like a mummy and they were going to bury me without telling anybody. At that point, I thought I was alive, but they were going to kill me. I remember resisting the wrapping by kicking, even though I was restrained. They later told me that I was biting and spitting and that it took 7 of them to hold me down, which is hard to believe because I'm a small guy. I remember being put into an ambulance, but after that, it gets foggy. I then woke up in a restraining bed in the hospital. There were cops all around, and I would not go to sleep because I was afraid I would wake up in jail. I spent all day in the hospital and eventually sobered up. Keep in mind that I am a normally laid-back, easygoing guy and would never in my wildest dreams even think about committing suicide, resisting arrest, and stealing a car. I would never do anything like that if I was sober. I don't want to blame this all on the drug. The setting and the mindset you have going into the trip really matters. Be very careful of AMT. March 17th, 2000. It was around 5 in the evening when I decided to collect a fresh specimen of plant material to begin with. I just went out of my house to the nearest playground, which is 3 minutes away, and just as I turned the corner, I saw 3 fine specimens of Datura anoxia. The plants were a deep green, growing to about 3 feet in height. There were numerous flowers and seed pods. Invoking a silent prayer, I cut off 2 leaves in what seemed to me to be a tender seed pod, not completely matured. I took these home. I skinned the seed pod using a peeler. I cut this peeled Datura pod in half. Half went into the compost pit, and the other half went into my stomach with the 2 leaves. Ingestion was a grueling process, and I almost threw up twice before I can get the plant material down my throat. I used some water to get it down. The taste was extremely bitter. I retired into my room and played some music. John McLaughlin with Shakti, I think. The first effects of the trip were obvious within approximately 20 minutes. I felt a dull, throbbing pain in my stomach. Not surprising considering that I had fasted for 12 hours prior to ingestion. It also felt like I had a rise in body temperature. The feeling rapidly changed into a flu-like feeling. This was getting me worried, and I was only an hour into the trip. I thought a change of scenery would be ideal, so a friend of mine, who was trip-sitting me, said we would go for a ride. I wasn't too sure of my physical coordination because I was feeling pretty nauseous, but my sitter assured me that there was no obvious physical response. He didn't seem to find me off balance at all. The elevator was really something, and I felt my stomach move into my throat. I would have thrown up had it not been that we reached the ground floor. As I sat on my bike, I noticed a distinct change in my mood, a change that I just cannot describe in words. It was like an upliftment of my physical body, a lightness. The entire environment was beginning to get a little dreamy edge to it. I said to the sitter, "Is this the beginning of the trip? It has to be." And he looked back at me and smiled. I felt compelled from deep inside to laugh, but my lips, they refused to move. For an instant wave of nausea racked my insides, and then it subsided again. It did not affect me during the next 3 days at all. Things were definitely starting to get weird now. There was a distinct change in my visual field, a blurring of things. It was like the whole environment around me was smeared as soon as I attempted to change my field of view. Gradually, all inputs from the peripheral vision area were gone. It was like looking at a painting. move my head, smear, then painting again, and so on and so forth. This went on for quite a long period of time, during which my sitter also said that I was continuously talking to myself. The sitter mentions that I distinctly talked about time and that there was no such thing. It seemed I was way off from my usual rants. He said I was looking into space and blabbering about how time is always warped and that there is no such thing as time. This went on till almost 1 in the morning, when the sitter reports that I started to get agitated about something. The sitter thought it was a good idea for me to have a shower. I have no memory of it at all, though I have distinct memories of what followed. It almost felt like my body was coming back together. This was just as I was getting out of the bathroom. I felt cold and weary. My sitter reports that my pupils are completely dilated, and there is some amount of redness in the eyes. All lights around look really bright, so I put on a night lamp, lie down, and decide to read. The book makes absolutely no sense. The text looks like a barcode, or the UPC. When asked what book I am reading, I have no clue. I have absolutely no idea what book I am holding. I have no visual focus. At this point, I tell the sitter that I am not feeling well and that I should see a doctor. My sitter reminds me that I have ingested some datura. I don't seem to have a memory that I took any. I spent half an hour trying to convince my sitter that I didn't take any datura and that he must be crazy, saying, "I would never do datura, man. I think shrooms are the best." Writing this down, I can imagine what other people who have tripped on datura go through. There doesn't seem to be a distinct difference in tripping and not tripping. You feel completely normal, yet you are in serious delirium and blabbering about all sorts of things. All of a sudden, I feel the need to lay down. The sitter turns off the light, and I begin to fly. I had this feeling of enormous speed, like when you are skydiving or bungee jumping. It felt like my heart was gonna thump out of my rib cage. My skin was crackling with electricity, and then I saw my mother. At that moment, the feeling stopped. I asked my mom what she was doing here. She should be teaching. The spring term is about to begin. She just laughed at me and asked what I wanted and why I had come. At that point, I got really confused. I told her she was the one who had to come to me. I thought she wanted to meet me. She said to me, "No, I don't want to meet you." And then I got the feeling again. I feel really sweaty and damp. It's like the air all around me has become really humid. I feel someone's hand on my shoulder. I look up, a blurry outline of my sitter. He said that for the past 3 hours I have been curled up in a fetal position on my bed, just shivering with cold. He felt a distinct rise in my body temperature and decided it was time for a shower. When on datura, showers bring back a distinct back to normal feel, regardless of the fact that you are in extreme delirium. This can make you do really stupid things. March 18th, 2000. My sitter is prompting me to eat something. He said it's been almost 20 hours since I have been tripping. I tell him I'm not feeling hungry. I ask why is the light so bright, and he says it's daytime, the sun is out. I asked him when will I rise and when will I set, the light hurts my eyes. I am complaining continuously, almost whining. He gets me some bread and some milk. Suddenly I say I am hungry and wolf down 4 slices of bread and swallow the milk. It's strange because normally I hate milk. I have puked all over the table and have shit in my pants. My sitter has changed, and I have no clue who or where I am. There is darkness everywhere I look. I felt no nausea, but I still puked, almost like a purge. At this point, I say out loud, "R, you think I'm dead? 'Cause I think so. And I'm not feeling so great. Can we call a doctor?" Again, my sitter from now on, R, reminds me that I'm tripping on datura. I say, "So what if I'm tripping on it? I think I'm dead anyway." R laughs a bit and says, "It's been 34 hours since you ate it, and you are still very delirious." I seem to find it funny and laugh too. When he gives me a hand mirror, I can't see a thing, and say it isn't a mirror, just a dumb piece of plastic. He says it's my girlfriend's compact she had left behind, but I say I don't have a girlfriend. I don't remember any of what follows, so it's a rough reconstruction. March 19th, 2000. I curled up in my bed and was talking to myself for hours. I urinated in my bed 2 times, and I lacked any sense of place and time. R reports that my body became flushed, where the skin gets all red like when you blush. Seems towards the end of day 2, I was no longer agitated. I wanted to read a book, but I still couldn't. I keep complaining about my inability to read. R says he'll put on some music. He plays something on the CD player, and I can't hear a thing. He says it's the Doors, and I say it sounds like he is playing some kind of sound frequency. I talk animatedly about how I can fly when I close my eyes. R tells me, "Why don't you relax and try to fly?" It seems after this that I went to lay down on my bed for almost 10 hours. It seems I was blabbering in the beginning, but gradually I stopped, and then at some point during the day I fell asleep. March 20th, 2000. I wake up at around 6 a.m. I feel cleansed, I can read and write, and listen to music. I feel like I have that heavy-headedness you get when you smoke through the night, and sleep very little. R says he has never seen someone trip on Datura like that, and that he would never like to try it. He says I have been completely mad for the past 2.5 days. I don't agree with him, but I keep my mouth shut. March 21st, 2000. I have slept for almost 20 hours, had very vivid dreams, woke up thrice to drink water. I feel like I have been reborn. I feel perfectly normal. Datura has to be without doubt the weirdest deliriant there is. It had me completely deluded about what I saw, what I heard, what I ate, and what I felt. It is a complete acting drug, one that should be used only if you are ready to walk the fine line. Datura is really taking it close to the edge. Never have I felt elation, depression, anger, hate, love, and insanity all in one trip. Never have I felt such emotive physical fear and sadness, and I didn't know I could fly. I do not recommend Datura for anyone who is not ready. Just open your mind.